Hi, my name is Nick.
I'm Brandon.
We are the hosts of the Tennis Podcast, where every week we cover a different top 10-ish list. We cover lists such as the highest grossing films of all time, the best-selling musicians of all time, the
sexiest mogwais, the richest leprechauns,
all this and more we cover on the Tennis Podcast.
I had more.
You can find us on all podcast players, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher.
Something by Samsung, a little wooden box with the dial on it.
All you gotta do is search for 10ISH Podcast. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at TennishPod. And Brandon, what will we do if the listeners don't check out our podcast?
We'll cut your fucking head off.
Don't make us cut your fucking head off. Listen to the Tennis Podcast. Bye.
Welcome to No Better Death, the podcast that knows while you can die a no better death than your own, that doesn't mean we can't take a look for the unusual and noteworthy in the deaths of others. Each week we'll take an in-depth look at some out-of-the-ordinary deaths and the events surrounding them. This show will contain explicit language and graphic details. I am your host, Sick Grayson. What up, Death Nerds? And that is now the official name for my audience. The placeholder titled Deadites didn't really stick with me, being the demons from Evil Dead and all. Plus, this is a history podcast, which makes you a nerd if you listen to it. It just so happens to be a morbid and death-related show, so I think Death Nerds is appropriate. Note I said morbid history, not true crime. Anyway, it's me, back from the holidays. I hope you had a good one, whatever you celebrate, or if you don't celebrate anything at all, that's cool too. Whatever, as long as you didn't die while the rest of us were partying. At some point, I drank too much. I've been digging this Seagram's Extra Smooth Vodka. It's filtered 5 times, you can barely taste it, which is the part that messed me up. My wife and I had a date night at some point about a week or so ago. We had 3 drinks each at Applebee's, the dollar drinks, the Jolly Rancher stuff. Then we hit a bar for a drink or two on the way home. Then when we got home, I thought, I'll have a shot or two of this vodka and some orange juice. Apparently, I drank half the bottle and ended up doing a 30-minute bit where I stood behind a life-size Bane stand-up with a bullhorn doing a monologue as Bane. I don't remember the whole thing, but I do recall saying something about Bane being an incel who can't get laid because of the mask and his balls are so blue they're black. I woke up the next morning with what I think was the first hangover I've ever had, and it sucked hardcore. I was out of commission for a whole day. But other than that, the holidays were great. The kids got a new trampoline and season passes to an amusement park. My son got what I think was every dinosaur-related item Walmart has to offer. And my daughter got a giant box of Naruto stuff. She gets on to me all the time for mispronouncing it. I had a painting of Tech 9 as the librarian from Devil's Carnival commissioned for my wife, and she loved that. Some other stuff too, Pennywise cereal, a couple shirts, a canvas print of her sitting at the top of Horseshoe Bend, some other random stuff, and I made out pretty good myself. I got an actual chair for the studio, so I'm no longer sitting in a metal folding chair. And I got this cool contraption that boosts my mic signal so I don't have to crank up the volume as much on my audio interface. So it should make the show sound a little better. I'm just hoping it's not too sensitive and it doesn't actually introduce more noise than it's eliminating. I got an autographed picture of Robert Stack with certificate of authenticity and a stack of books and comics. So I can't complain. I know the holidays aren't about presents. I do believe that. It's about taking a minute out of the year to spend with loved ones and showing them they're appreciated. But come on, presents are fucking dope. We went ice skating a couple times, went to the theater to see some Disney Nutcracker flick that was pretty cool for a Disney movie. Drove around looking at lights. So yeah, the Graysons had fun, and I hope you did too. No headlines today. I want to get straight into the story because it's one that I genuinely loved putting together, and it deserves to stand on its own with no other stories involved. This was supposed to be part of an episode that covered a few goth music icons that have left us over the years, but the story came out so long that it has to be its own standalone episode. I've got like 20 pages of script here, so no headlines. All is well with the Graysons. I hope all is well with you. With that, we're going to jump right into the story. No fucking around today. I will say this, if you do not know who Ian Curtis is, he was the singer for a band named Joy Division, who became New Order after Ian's death. Now some, and I would hope most of you do know who Ian and Joy Division and New Order are, but if you don't, hopefully you at least remember the song Blue Monday by Orgy. That's a cover of a New Order song, and New Order was the band formed from the ashes of Joy Division after Ian's death. If you've never heard Joy Division, I suggest, and I know other goths out there are going to shred me for using the most popular song as a reference, but it is also the most accessible. Go listen to Love Will Tear Us Apart. If you've watched 13 Reasons Why, then you've heard it at least once every other episode. It seems like they're constantly playing that song, and then every kid in that town has a Joy Division poster on their wall, which is really fucking weird. No collection of kids in a town have that many Joy Division posters between them. It's mathematically impossible. But yeah, just go check out Love Will Tear Us Apart, just to sort of jog your memory about who Joy Division was. And with that, on to our story. And if you do hear any background noise, my family is home upstairs. Usually I record when no one's home, but the holidays kind of put me behind on my recording schedule. I need to get this out as soon as possible, so I am recording with them here today. So if you hear voices yelling, bumping around, whatever, that's just the kids and my wife fucking around upstairs. I do apologize for any inconvenience. Ian Curtis was born on July 15th, 1956 at the Memorial Hospital in Stretford, Lancashire, England, and grew up in a working-class household in Macclesfield, Cheshire. He was the first of two children born to Kevin and Doreen Curtis. From an early age, Curtis was a bookish and intelligent child, displaying a particular flair for poetry. He was awarded a scholarship at the age of 11 at Macclesfield Independent King's School. There, he developed his interest in philosophy, literature, and eminent poets such as Tom Gunn. While at King's School, he was awarded several scholastic awards in recognition of his abilities, particularly at the ages of 15 and 16. The year after Ian had graduated from King's School, the Curtis family purchased a house from a relative and moved to New Mawston. As a teenager, Curtis chose to perform social service by visiting the elderly as part of a school program. While visiting, he and his friends would steal any prescription drugs that they found and later take them together as a group. On one occasion, when he was 16, after consuming a large dosage of Largactil he and his friends had stolen, Curtis was discovered unconscious in his bedroom by his father and was taken to the hospital to have his stomach pumped. Curtis had a keen interest in music since the age of 12, and this interest developed greatly in his teenage years, with artists such as Jim Morrison and David Bowie being particular favorites of his, and thus influencing his poetry and art. Curtis could seldom afford to purchase records, leading him to frequently steal them from local shops. By his mid-teens, Curtis had also developed a reputation among his peers as a strong-willed individual with a keen interest in fashion. And I don't know if you've ever seen how Ian Curtis dressed. I wouldn't say it was a keen interest in fashion, but he definitely had his own look. Despite gaining 9 O-levels at King's School and briefly studying A-levels in history and divinity at St. John's College, Curtis soon became disenchanted with academic life and abandoned his studies to commit himself to finding employment. Despite abandoning his studies at St. John's College, Curtis continued to focus on the pursuit of art, literature, and music, and would gradually draw lyrical and conceptual inspiration from ever more insidious subjects. Curtis obtained a job at a record shop in Manchester city centre before obtaining more stable employment within the civil service. His employment as a civil servant saw Curtis initially deployed to Chilham, where he worked for several months with the Ministry of Defence, before he was offered alternative employment within the Manpower Services Commission in a building at Piccadilly Gardens. He later worked as a civil servant in Woodford, Greater Manchester, although at his request, approximately 1 year later, Curtis was posted to Macclesfield Employment Exchange, where he worked as an assistant disablement resettlement officer. So it sounds like he worked for social services in England. Basically, civil service is like government work, kind of like a Department of Health and Human Services is in America. On August 23, 1975, Curtis married Deborah Woodruff, to whom he was introduced by a friend, Tony Nuttall. Ian and Deborah initially became friends, then began dating in December 1972 when both were 16 years old. Their wedding service was conducted at St. Thomas Church in Henbury, Cheshire. Curtis was 19 and Woodruff 18. They had one child, a daughter named Natalie, born April 16, 1979. Initially, the couple lived with Ian's grandparents, although shortly after their marriage, the couple moved to a working-class neighborhood in Chatterton, where they paid a mortgage while working in jobs neither enjoyed. Before long, the couple became disillusioned with life in Oldham and remortgaged their house before briefly returning to live with Ian's grandparents. Shortly thereafter, in May 1977, the couple moved into their own house in Barton Street, Macclesfield. At a July 1976 Sex Pistols gig at Manchester's Lesser Free Trade Hall, Curtis encountered three childhood school friends named Bernard Sumner, Peter Hook, and Terry Mason. The trio informed Curtis, whom they had seen at earlier punk gigs at the Electric Circus, of their intentions to form a band, and Curtis informed them of his then recent efforts to do likewise, before proposing himself as both their singer and lyricist. Joy Division would be one of four hugely important British post-punk bands that could trace its origins to that now legendary performance by the Sex Pistols, along with founding members of the Buzzcocks, the Smiths, and the Fall. Initially, Mason became the band's drummer, but his rehearsal sessions were largely unproductive and he briefly became the band's manager. The group then unsuccessfully attempted to recruit several drummers before selecting Stephen Morris in August of 1977. And while the DIY ethos of Sex Pistols gave them the courage to call themselves a band when they could barely play their newly purchased instruments, the band they ended up becoming was among the first punk-inspired groups to leave the punk rock sound behind. The critical step in that direction was the selection of Ian Curtis as vocalist. Curtis was less an aspiring rock star than he was an aspiring poet, and his moody, expressive lyrics would gradually guide the group's sound away from the thrash and anger of punk and towards something far more spare and melancholy. Initially, the band named themselves Warsaw from the title of a song on David Bowie's then recent album Low, but as this name somewhat conflicted with that of a London-based group named Warsaw Pact, they renamed themselves Joy Division. This moniker was derived from the 1955 novel The House of Dolls, which featured a Nazi concentration camp with a sexual slavery wing called the Joy Division. The cover of the band's first EP depicted a drawing of a Hitler Youth beating a drum, and the A-side contained a song called Warsaw, which was a musical retelling of the life of Nazi leader Rudolf Hess. The sound that Joy Division developed over the course of 1977 to 1979 included the addition of a synthesizer, an absolute violation of the lo-fi punk aesthetic, but a choice that marked the beginning of what eventually be called the New Wave. In 1979, the album Unknown Pleasures and its follow-up Control and the single Love Will Tear Us Apart made Joy Division into cult heroes in the UK, and Ian Curtis's mesmerizing stage demeanor turned him into a post-punk icon. The band was later managed by Rob Gretton, who, having already seen Joy Division perform live at local venues such as Rafters, offered to become their manager in 1978. After founding Factory Records with Alan Erasmus, Tony Wilson signed the band to his label following the band's first appearance on the TV music show he hosted. The appearance had been largely prompted by an abusive letter sent to Wilson by Curtis and saw the band play the song Shadow Play. While performing with Joy Division, Curtis became known for his quiet and awkward demeanor and a unique dancing style often reminiscent of the epileptic seizures he began experiencing in late 1978. Although predominantly a singer, Curtis also played guitar on a handful of tracks, usually when Sumner was playing the synthesizer, though there were rare instances when both Sumner and Curtis played guitar. Initially, Curtis played Sumner's Sure Gold Masquerader, but in September 1979 he acquired his own guitar, a Vox Phantom 6 Special, which had many built-in effects used both live and in studio. And these are really cool guitars. If you have the chance to check one out in person, I highly recommend it. They're kind of rare now, but they're still really cool. Curtis's wife has claimed that in October 1979, he began conducting an affair with the Belgian journalist and music promoter Annick Honoré, whom he had first met at a gig held in Brussels that month. Reportedly, despite the fact that he had for many years exhibited a somewhat controlling attitude within their relationship, which included minimizing any opportunity for his wife to come into contact with other men, Curtis was consumed with guilt over this affair due to being married and having a child, but at the same time still yearning to be with Honore. On one occasion in 1980, Curtis asked Bernard Sumner to make a decision on his behalf as to whether he should remain with his wife or form a deeper relationship with Anik. Sumner refused. Anik claimed in a 2010 interview that although she and Curtis had spent extensive periods of time in each other's company, their relationship had been a platonic one. Curtis's bandmates later recollected that Curtis began to become slightly lofty and distant from them after he had become acquainted with Anik, who was demanding of his time and attention. These facts would occasionally invoke pranks directed at himself and Anik from them. He is also known to have become a vegetarian, likely at Anik's behest, although he was known to have eaten meat when not in her presence. Curtis began suffering epileptic fits in late 1978. He was officially diagnosed with the condition on January 23rd the following year, with his particular case being described by doctors as so severe his life would be ruled to obsolescence by his severe epilepsy, without the various strong dosages of medications he was prescribed. Having joined the British Epilepsy Association, Curtis was initially open to discuss his condition with anyone who inquired, although he soon became withdrawn and reluctant to discuss any issue regarding his condition beyond the most mundane and necessary aspects. On each occasion, it became apparent a particular prescribed medication failed to control Curtis's seizures. His doctor would prescribe a different anticonvulsant, and his wife noted his being full of renewed enthusiasm that this particular formulation would help bring his seizures under control. Throughout 1979 and 1980, Curtis's condition gradually worsened amid the pressure of performances and touring, with his seizures becoming more frequent and more intense. Following his diagnosis, Curtis continued to drink, smoke, and maintain an irregular sleep pattern, against the advice given to those suffering from the condition. The medications Curtis was prescribed for his condition produced numerous side effects, including extreme mood swings. This change in personality was also observed by his wife, family, and in-laws, who noted how taciturn he had become in his wife's company. Following the birth of his daughter in April 1979, because of the severity of his medical condition, Ian was seldom able to hold his child in case he compromised her safety. Basically, he couldn't hold the baby for fear that he would have a seizure. He saw Joy Division going on without him. He felt very removed from it. With the epilepsy, he just knew he couldn't carry on with the performances. He'd sort of hit a pinnacle with Closer, and he knew he couldn't go on. At the time of the recording of the band's second album, Curtis's condition was particularly severe, with him enduring a weekly average of 2 tonic-clonic seizures. On one occasion during these recordings, Curtis's bandmates became concerned when they noted he had been absent from the studio for 2 hours. The band's bassist, Peter Hook, discovered Curtis unconscious on the floor of the studio's bathroom, having hurt his head on a sink following a seizure. Despite instances such as this, Hook stated that largely through ignorance of the condition, he, Sumner, and Morris did not know how to help. Nonetheless, Hook was adamant that Curtis never wanted to upset or concern his bandmates, and he would tell us what we wanted to hear if they expressed any concern as to his condition. In one incident at a concert held before almost 3,000 people at the Rainbow in Finsbury Park in April 1980, when Joy Division appeared alongside the Stranglers, the lighting technicians at this venue, contrary to instructions given to them by Rob Gretton prior to the gig, switched on strobe lights midway through Joy Division's performance, causing Ian to almost immediately stagger backwards and collapse against Stephen Morris's drum kit in the throes of an evident seizure. He had to be carried off stage to the band's dressing room to recuperate. When Curtis had recovered from his first seizure, he was adamant the band traveled to West Hampstead to honor their commitment to perform their second gig of the evening at this location, although some 25 minutes into the second gig, Curtis's dancing started to lose its rhythmic sense and change into something else entirely, before he collapsed to the floor and experienced the most violent seizure he'd endured to that date. Curtis's onstage dancing was often reminiscent of the seizures, and has been termed by some to be his epilepsy dance. Throughout Joy Division's live performances in 79 and 80, Curtis collapsed several times while performing and had to be carried off stage. To minimize any possibility of having a seizure, flashing lights were prohibited at Joy Division gigs, but despite these measures, Bernard Sumner later stated that certain percussion effects would cause Curtis to suffer a seizure. In April 1980, Terry Mason was appointed as a minder to ensure Curtis took his prescribed medications, avoided alcohol consumption, and got sufficient sleep. Regarding the choreography of Curtis's stage performances, Greil Marcus, in The History of Rock and Roll in 10 Songs, quotes John Savage from Melody Maker. Ian's mesmeric style mirrored the ever more frequent epileptic spasms that Deborah Curtis had to cope with at home. Marcus remarked that Curtis's performance might also have been a matter of intentionally replicating fits, reenacting them, using them as a form of energy and a form of music. Curtis's final live performance with Joy Division was on May 2, 1980. This performance was at the High Hall of Birmingham University and included Joy Division's first and only performance of Ceremony, later recorded by New Order and released as their debut single. The final song Curtis performed on stage with Joy Division prior to his death was Digital. Following Curtis's first definite suicide attempt on April 6, 1980, Tony Wilson and his partner Lindsay, expressing deep concerns as to Joy Division's intense touring schedule being detrimental to Curtis's physical and mental well-being, invited him to recuperate at their cottage in Charlesworth. At this address, he is known to have written several letters to Anik proclaiming his love for her as he recuperated from his initial suicide attempt. By early 1980, Curtis's marriage to Deborah was floundering as she had commenced divorce proceedings due to his having failed to cease all contact with Anik. Curtis had enjoyed solitude but had never been mentally equipped for living alone. He was having difficulty balancing his family obligations with his musical ambitions, and his health was gradually worsening as a result of his epilepsy, thus increasing his dependency upon others. On the evening prior to his death, Curtis informed Bernard Sumner of his insistence upon seeing his wife that evening. He had also made firm plans to rendezvous with his bandmates at Manchester Airport the following day, prior to their departure for America. So they were getting ready to go on their first American tour. Until now, they had just sort of been this English band, built up a little bit of a buzz around England. They've got 2 albums, about to hit the big tour, but his health is falling apart, his marriage is falling apart, he's pining for this other woman, he's feeling utterly alone, and all this together just sort of sent him over the edge. On the evening of May 17th, Curtis asked his wife to drop her impending divorce proceedings. She replied that he would likely have changed his mind by the following morning, and then, mindful of his previous suicide attempt and also concerned for his state of anxiety and frustration, she offered to spend the night in his company. Deborah then drove to her parents' home to inform them of her intentions. When Deborah Curtis returned to Barton Street, Ian's demeanor had changed, and he informed his wife of his intentions to spend the night alone, first making her promise not to return to the house before he had taken his scheduled 10 a.m. train to Manchester to rendezvous with his bandmates. In the early hours of May 18, 1980, 2 months before his 24th birthday, Ian killed himself by hanging in the kitchen of his house at 77 Barton Street, Macclesfield. His wife Deborah found his body the next morning. He had used the kitchen's washing line to hang himself after having written a note to her in which he declared his love for her despite having recently conducted an affair with Anik. In her biography, Touching from a Distance, Deborah Curtis recalls finding her husband's body and initially thinking that he was still alive before noticing the washing line around his neck. According to Tony Wilson, prior to his suicide, Curtis had watched Werner Herzog's 1977 film Strozek and listened to Iggy Pop's album The Idiot. His wife recollected that he had taken photographs of their wedding and their baby daughter off the walls, apparently to view as he composed his suicide note. At the time of his suicide, Joy Division was on the eve of their debut North American tour, and Deborah Curtis has stated Ian had viewed the upcoming tour with extreme trepidation, not only because of his extreme fear of flying — he tried to go by ship, but everybody vetoed that — but also because he had expressed deep concerns as to how American audiences would react to his epilepsy. Deborah also claimed Ian had confided in her on several occasions that he held no desire to live past his early 20s. He had furthermore expressed to both his wife and Anik his deep concerns as to his medical condition being likely to kill him in addition to his receiving mockery from the band's audiences, and that this mockery would only increase from the band's impending American audiences on their upcoming tour. According to Lindsay Reed, the wife of the manager of Factory Records, Curtis had informed her shortly before his death of his belief that, with his epilepsy, he could no longer perform live with the band. In addition, he had claimed that with the impending release of Closer, he thought the band had hit an artistic pinnacle. Tony Wilson later said that Curtis likely saw his act of suicide as somewhat altruistic. So it kind of sounds like he's getting into that Kurt Cobain zone of mentality where he starts fearing being a sellout, that like the early stuff before they really had a big audience is the true artistic expression, and everything past that's going to be downhill. In a 2013 Guardian interview, Genesis P. Orridge, inventor of industrial music, spoke about being the last person Curtis spoke to before his death. Ian Curtis was a young genius. We were the last person he spoke to on the phone. Ian said, "I don't want to go on the American tour, I'd rather be dead." He sang our song Weeping about suicide down the phone. We were ringing people in Manchester saying, "You've got to go round to Ian's because he's going to try and kill himself." The people we got through to went, "Oh, he's always being dramatic," and the other people were out. Even now, it really upsets me. So Genesis is saying they tried to warn people that this was about to happen and no one listened. And if you want to know why Genesis says we were the last people he spoke to, you really need to look into the story of Genesis and Lady P. Orridge. It is unique, ? But outside the scope of this show, definitely worth knowing. Bassist Peter Hook later reflected on the tragedy of the timing of Curtis's death, just before what might have been a breakthrough to fame. He claimed that prior to the release of the 2007 documentary film Joy Division, a specialist in epilepsy had viewed the combination of drugs Curtis had been prescribed for his condition and expressed concerns about its safety. Strange as it may sound, it wasn't until after his death that we really listened to Ian's lyrics and clearly heard the inner turmoil in them, said Bernard Sumner, reflecting on many of the lyrics Curtis had written for Joy Division's second and final album. Curtis's body was cremated at Macclesfield Crematorium on May 23rd. His ashes were later buried at Macclesfield Cemetery. A memorial stone inscribed with Ian Curtis, 18-5-80, and Love Will Tear Us Apart, was placed above the ashes. In a 2007 interview with The Guardian, Stephen Morris expressed regret that nobody had realized during Curtis's life the distress he was in, even though it was evident in his lyrics. Ian Curtis and Joy Division stand out, not least because their music portrayed emotions, sorrows, and terrors in a way that most popular music never comes within a country mile of, and because Ian Curtis held nothing back in revealing his inner feelings, both live and on record. Indeed, he seemed to be singing directly to the listener in a way that seems too personal for a pop record. As Robert Smith of The Cure, himself no stranger to seriously soul-searching habits in music, put it, "I remember hearing Closer for the first time and thinking, I can't ever imagine making something as powerful as this. I thought I'd have to kill myself to make a convincing record." That's Robert Smith saying that. Just take a second to let that sink in. When Robert Smith is saying he couldn't make something like what Joy Division made without killing himself, that means something. To understand why Joy Division sounded the way they did, it's important to look at the time and context that they grew up and lived in. The British Empire and class structures were crumbling, and unemployment and inflation were sky high. Britain was in an economic decline with huge public spending cuts, political polarization, and an infinite number of strikes, not to mention the added danger of IRA bombings and hooligan violence, as England had failed to qualify for 2 consecutive football World Cups in the 70s. The optimism of the swinging 60s was well and truly gone. This was especially true for north of England in general and Manchester in particular, a city that played an important role in the Industrial Revolution. Joy Division guitarist Bernard Sumner remembers a Manchester of factories where nothing was pretty and growing up in a place where you didn't have much chance of progressing in the world. You could hear the landscapes and soundscapes of the 70s Manchester in Joy Division's music. Indeed, Joy Division's first album, Unknown Pleasures, was the album that most perfectly evoked the spirit of 1979, according to journalist Mick Middles. Joy Division sounded like Manchester, cold, sparse, and at times bleak. They sounded like the place they were from, without a doubt, as a fellow Mancunian, former Smiths guitarist Johnny Marr put it. But for Joy Division's lead singer, there were also interior landscapes to contend with. Ian Curtis might have been bipolar. He certainly had a split personality and was affected by severe mood swings, and when he sang feel it closing in, day out on digital, and a duel of personalities that stretch all true realities on Dead Souls, it rang true. In fact, there seemed to be several Ian Curtises. The husband and father who took pride in helping disabled people at the Employment Exchange in Macclesfield, where he worked as an assistant disablement resettlement officer. The Ian who partook in all manner of laddish pranks with band and friends, such as fighting, drinking, and chasing groupies, and pissing in ashtrays and looking at turds in toilets. The aesthete who had an obsession with death and rock and film stars who had died young, who read about human suffering in Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, Hess, and Ballard. Read to his wife Debbie about how there is no mystery so great as misery from Oscar Wilde's The Happy Prince. According to Peter Hook, there were just too many Ians to cope with. The perfect friend or partner for Ian would have combined all of those things, but if that person exists, they were nowhere near our social scene, so he had to be a chameleon. Thinking about it, I bet even Ian didn't know who the real Ian was. A lot of the myth and mystique surrounding Joy Division in general, and Ian Curtis in particular, tends to portray a rather more one-dimensional sense of torment and gloom. Perhaps because the band did a few interviews, because the cover art contains little information about the band, or because the pictures and footage that were published and released of them were almost exclusively black and white, including the otherwise excellent film Control, based on Ian's wife Debbie Curtis's book Touching from a Distance. According to Joy Division's main photographer Kevin Cummins, Ian was fun to be with, but has this image of a depressed, reclusive, gloomy, romantic hero because I only released photographs of Ian looking depressed. This is echoed by Ian's mother, who has emphasized that her son's life wasn't tragic, and by Peter Hook, who described Ian as a people-pleaser and one of the lads as far as we were concerned. But however much Ian kept a straight face and could be fun to be with, in retrospect, there were many signs that he was not well. Ian's lyrics had always portrayed images of human cruelty and coldness, pressure, crises, failure, and loss of control. But they were becoming increasingly depressing as his marriage and health deteriorated, and he felt the pressure of bearing his soul as a lead singer of an increasingly popular band. He was singing lines such as, "Existence, well what does it matter? It's creeping up slowly, that last fatal hour. I've lost the will to want more, watching the real as it comes to a close. Look beyond the day at hand, there's nothing there at all." And "Hangman looks round as he waits, cord stretches tight, then it breaks." The latter from what was probably the last song the band ever wrote, "In a Lonely Place." Mancunian journalist Paul Morley, who has written extensively on Joy Division, even describes Joy Division's final album Closer as a series of blatant suicide notes to a number of people in Ian's immediate vicinity. Was it the medication that made him end his own life, as his wife and friends believed? Or was it all the soul-searching, the illness, and having to make a life choice between his wife and girlfriend? Curtis himself perhaps alluded to one reason when he told Radio Blackburn in 1980 that basically, we want to play and enjoy what we like playing. I think that when we stop doing that, that will be time to pack it in. That will be the end. According to his wife, he had only intended to make one album and one single and was unhappy with the music business and the pressure of being in Joy Division. As Curtis wrote in a letter to his girlfriend Anik, "Joy Division in itself is such a great responsibility not only for my own health and peace of mind, but the fact that on me rests the future of others and more beside. Indeed, the strain had become too much." He had left a note on the mantelpiece for his wife that everyone believed was a suicide note. According to neighbor Kevin Wood, it turned out to be a letter to Debbie saying that when he got back from America, he wanted to get back with her and be a part of a normal family again. Everyone seemed to have a different explanation of what happened and why. Peter Hook said Ian had seemed happy to be going to America. Ian's friend and colleague Genesis P. Orridge, on the other hand, insisted that he had said he'd rather die than go on that tour. According to Ian's sister Carol, one of the reasons for this was that her brother could mask his emotions. He never let you know what was really going on. He wouldn't want to upset you, but in my mind, I never thought he'd see it past 30, to be honest. According to in-house designer Peter Seville, who designed Joy Division's album covers, Ian's story is one of the last true stories in pop, in a business dominated by pop culture. John Lydon, aka Johnny Rotten, had started it all when Curtis, Hook, and Sumner had seen the Sex Pistols that summer in 1977 and decided to form a band. He believes young musicians today have no bollocks, no guts. They're all young and fed up with their lives, but they don't sing about it. They don't do anything to change it. Unlike Joy Division, who obviously meant it to a degree that they ended up influencing everyone from George Michael to The Cure and Interpol, as well as going on to form New Order. The sound of Joy Division is omnipresent. Dead heroes do not age. They don't fade away. They don't make bad albums in later years. They allow us to project our fears, hopes, and dreams onto them like a musical version of Dorian Gray and let them stare into the abyss for us and describe what they see. Ian Curtis once said that you either stay outside the system or go in totally and try to change it. Let it be part of his legacy that he tried and had to give up in the end. But as he wrote in a note found by his wife, reality is only a term based on values and well-worn principles, whereas the dream goes on forever. Shortly after Curtis's cremation, Sumner, Hook, and Morris, strongly aided by Rob Gretton, formed a new band, initially calling themselves the No Names and playing largely instrumental tracks. They soon became New Order. Shortly after Curtis's death, Sumner inherited the Vox Phantom 6 special guitar that Ian had acquired in 1979. He used this instrument in several early New Order songs, including the single Everything's Gone Green. In 1985, New Order released the instrumental song Elegia. That's how I've always pronounced it. It could be Elegia, I don't know, it looks like Elegia. Written in memory of Ian Curtis. Label-sharing band The Durruti Column released in 1981 their album LC, including the Ian Curtis tribute song The Missing Boy. In 1990, Psychic TV released I See Water, a song dedicated to Curtis. Deborah Curtis has written a biographical account of their marriage, Touching from a Distance, which was first published in 1995. This biography details in part his relationship with Anik. In 1999, the post-hardcore band Thursday released a song titled Ian Curtis on their debut album, Waiting. The 2002 New Order song Here to Stay was dedicated to Ian Curtis, Rob Gretton, and Martin Hannett. Authors Mick Middles and Lindsay Reed released the book Torn Apart, The Life of Ian Curtis in 2006. This biography takes a more intimate look at Curtis and includes photographs from personal family albums and excerpts from his letters to Anik during their relationship. Music journalist Paul Morley wrote Joy Division Piece by Piece, writing about Joy Division from 1977 to 2007, and the book was published in late 2007. The book documents all of his writings and reviews about Joy Division from their formation until Tony Wilson's death. The words Ian Curtis Lives are written on a wall in Wallace Street, Wellington, New Zealand. The message, which appeared shortly after the singer's death in 1980, is repainted whenever it is painted over. A nearby wall on the same street on January 4, 2005 was originally emblazoned Ian Curtis R.I.P., later modified to read Ian Curtis R.I.P. Walk in Silence, along with the incorrect dates 1960 to 1980. Both are referred to as the Ian Curtis Wall. In 2012, Curtis was among the British cultural icons selected by artist Peter Blake to appear in a new version of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album cover. So, and all this is doing is just running down, the people he's influenced, the things that have been done in his honor, and it's quite an extensive list. Curtis was portrayed by Sean Harris in the 2002 film 24-Hour Party People, which dramatized the rise and fall of Factory Records from the 1970s to the 1990s. In 2007, a British Ian Curtis biographical film entitled Control was released. This film was largely based upon Deborah Curtis's book Touching from a Distance. The film was directed by the Dutch rock photographer and music video director Anton Corbijn, who had previously photographed the band and directed the video for their single Atmosphere. Deborah Curtis and Tony Wilson were executive producers, while Todd Eckert of Clara Flora was the producer. Sam Riley, the lead singer of the band 10,000 Things, portrays Curtis, while Samantha Morton plays his wife Deborah. Control was debuted at the Cannes Film Festival on May 17, 2007 and took 3 awards at the Directors Fortnight. Control portrays Curtis's secondary school romance with Deborah, their marriage, his problems balancing his domestic life with his rise to fame, his struggles with both his major depressive issues and his poorly medicated epilepsy, and his later relationship with Anik. In 2014, the house in which Curtis committed suicide went on sale. Upon hearing this news, a fan initiated a campaign via Indiegogo to raise funds to purchase the house with intentions to preserve the property as a museum to Ian Curtis and Joy Division. The campaign only raised £2,000 of the intended final goal of £150,000. The money raised was later donated to the Epilepsy Society and MIND charities. Upon hearing of the failure of this project, an entrepreneur and musician named Hayter Goldman purchased the property, offering to pay £75,000 compensation on top of the requested price of $125,000 in order to secure the purchase of 77 Barton Street and thus reverse the transacted sale from a private purchaser, which at the time was already in progress. Justifying his decision, Goldman stated he intended the property to act as a Joy Division museum and as a digital hub to support musicians and other artists worldwide. In a 2010 interview, Anik had this to say: "I'm always expecting Natalie, Ian's daughter, to ring the doorbell. I'd so much like to tell her my version of everything that happened. When questioned about meeting Ian, she says, 'It's my first love story. Until then, I'd only lived through music. I'd had the odd flirt, and then I meet a rare being, exquisite, polite, everything I love.' Silly to say, but Ian had beautiful eyes, a soft gaze. I feel a person who is suffering, fragile, and immediately kind to me." And in regards to Ian's persona, she states, "On stage, he comes out of himself as if he's exorcising all his demons. He's an erupting volcano. After the gig, he's exhausted, mentally and physically. He goes back to being that excessively sweet and shy person, closed, full of questions about the band and his life. He has a huge potential, but the great honesty, not to realize it. He has no cynicism, no pretense." When asked about his death, Anik replies, "I still think that his death was a pure moment of aberration. I had spoken to him that same evening and everyone knew he was happy to be going to the States. He was taking 20 pills a day, and as he'd mixed that with alcohol, on Saturday, May 17th, I was at the James White gig at the Plan K, and Ian called me to say he wanted to see me at Heathrow before he left for the USA. When I got to London on Sunday morning, I felt that something had happened, as I didn't see him at the rendezvous. I called his parents' house. He'd been living there for a few weeks, and Ian's dad said, 'Ian is dead,' and hung up. I couldn't go to the funeral because Deborah Curtis, as she wrote in her book, was afraid I'd make a scene, which makes me laugh, but she accepted that I should go and see Ian's body at the chapel in Macclesfield. I was a wreck. To this day, she still has every letter Ian ever wrote her." Natalie Curtis, Ian's daughter, now a grown woman and college-educated photographer, inspired in her youth by photographs of her father, especially those by Kevin Cummins and Anton Corbin and the Joy Division record sleeves, is pursuing her own art and path in life. She doesn't speak of her father very often and hates being asked about her family, though in various interviews she has stated, "I'm really proud of Joy Division's music. I think it's great stuff, and it's lovely that people are still listening to it. I like lots of Joy Division records myself, especially Closer. I also like dance stuff and country music like Johnny Cash, but I'm not musical. I tried playing piano as a kid but didn't make grade 1. I'm really bad. Though I don't really listen to Joy Division very much, I would if it wasn't for the fact that it's my dad singing. Who wants to listen to their dad singing? It's like watching your dad dance. It's just dead embarrassing. Your dad's never cool, is he?" Ian's wife, Debbie, has probably been the most vocal when it comes to discussing all things Ian, and if you want her full take, you can take a look at her book. It's been mentioned a few times over the course of this show, or you can check out many of the interviews she's done. She's been quoted as saying that she's no longer mad at him or about Love Will Tear Us Apart, the group's biggest hit, being about her, stating that too much time has passed to still be angry. And I do encourage you to read the book and find some of her interviews. There's too much from her to quote here on the show, but her insight might be the most informed since she was there from the age of 16 through his final days. Though, and this is just my opinion / doubt, I can't help but wonder if maybe she's coloring the story, putting the details through her own prism rather than laying them out as facts. But the truth is, the truth doesn't exist. No truth really exists because it would have to be an abstract collection of the perceived realities of everyone that knew Ian and Ian's perception of his own life. And since it's impossible to stitch all those points of view into anything cohesive or coherent, all we're really left with is a collection of what multiple individuals who knew Ian think is the truth. It's up to us to use our own intuition to determine what we think the reality of the situation was based on accounts by those multiple individuals, and even then, That's kind of useless because we weren't there to witness any of it. Same thing with Kurt Cobain or anyone else that checked out early without leaving any kind of thorough explanation. Regardless of what kind of note is left, no suicide is ever really clarified. I mean, you'd have to write a fucking book in order to put your entire mind state in print, and no one does that before they kill themselves, so all we can really do is speculate. Personally, I think a combination of the pressure that comes with a band that's about to break, the responsibilities of a father and husband, and the confusion of trying to choose between two women mixed with the negative effects of his medication pushed him to make the grimmer choice between opting out and seeing it through. That day, it just got particularly bad and he checked out. My first thought anytime the Joy Division story is brought up is, what if they had gone on that American tour and Joy Division became the biggest British export since the Beatles? How would that have shaped music for generations to come? I mean, look at what Nirvana as a band was able to do with its relatively short existence. Compound that kind of influence over a career of 5-10 times longer than the one they had, and Joy Division could have been one of the most influential bands in history. And this is all theoretical and assuming they were on the trajectory we think they were following, but who does music influence? The youth. And who takes action and processes these influences and turns that influence into something new, something better? The youth. What if Joy Division could have stuck around and reached, say, 500 million people in the 80s? What kind of impact would that have had on the world we live in today? We don't know. It's easy to say that it's just music, but since man first started tapping sticks on rocks to make beats, music has been one of the best communication tools we've ever had. It's a way to reach those you may not otherwise have anything in common with, a way to get different points of view across to those who don't share our point of view, a way to say what can't always be said in words, a way to introduce new perspectives, a way to keep old traditions alive. The list goes on. Music will forever be the greatest means of communication and discussing things that can't be expressed with other platforms or art forms. What could Ian and Joy Division have done if he would have just gotten on the fucking plane instead of hanging himself? Didn't he owe it to himself, his family, his band, his fans, and possibly the world at large to do that? It's easy to say one person can't change the world, but that's a lie. We've seen it countless times for good or bad, in everyone from Martin Luther King Jr. to Adolf Hitler. One person can change the world. We just don't have faith in ourselves or the world around us to believe that we could be one of the ones who changes the world. But someone is. Right now, there's between 7 and 8 billion people on this planet, and I guarantee you more than a couple are going to change the world in some way. And those world-changing people have influences. What if he was to go on and influence one of these world changers, but that never happened because he opted out? What if he himself had gone on to be one of those world changers? He was only 23. There's no telling what he could have accomplished. And that's true of anyone. You don't have to be a rock star or a famous author or fucking George Clooney to change the world, but you do have to give yourself the opportunity to find out. And you never will if you follow a path similar to Ian Curtis or Roz Williams or Kurt Cobain. And as much as Ian's story is a tale of people not noticing a friend and loved one's mental health struggles, as happy as I am that we live in a time that is starting to take mental well-being seriously, I blame in part his doctors. I know there's a lot of people out there that need their meds and those medications greatly help people, but for some, those medications are more damaging than they are helpful. I think in the case of Ian and countless others, the pharmaceutical industry pushed bad medicines on unwitting doctors who then prescribed them to patients and ended up damning them rather than saving them. I don't take my meds, and as fucked in the head as I am, I'm better off without them. Same thing for my wife. She's better off without medication, and I think Ian would have been better off without his meds, or at least on different ones that didn't fuck his brain up. And one thing I've advocated from the very first episode of No Better Death is awareness of your surroundings, of yourself, of the things and people in your life, of what the powers that be are doing in and to the world they share with you, and your fucking medications fall in there somewhere. Just because a doctor knows what a medication is supposed to do doesn't mean that's what it will do inside your specific body. Everyone is different. If you're worried a medication is having negative effects on you, talk to your doctor about safely coming off it or replacing it. Doctors may know medicine better than you, but they don't know you better than you, and you have to be your own advocate. And I apologize if I'm rambling or any part of this wasn't coherent or if things seemed jumbled this episode. I think I did a good job researching this and reporting it to you, but maybe not. Once I put the show out into the world, I no longer control it. My perception is null. It's all up to the listeners to decide. This one fucked with my head, for some obvious reasons and parallels with my own existence, and very likely for reasons that are unobvious, even to myself. But that is the story of Joy Division frontman Ian Curtis, with my own thoughts tacked on at the end there. What did we learn on this? It's up to you to decide if you learned anything, and if not, that's cool too. Just because it's serious doesn't mean it can't also just be pure entertainment, but I'd like to think that Ian's story does teach us something. I'm going to send you off with a 10-minute BBC Blackburn interview with Ian from 1980. You can find it on YouTube, but I thought I'd just tack it on here to keep it simple. Ian only did a very small handful of audio interviews, and they aren't always the best sounding audio quality, but this one's pretty decent. It's nothing tantalizing. In fact, he just sounds like a super, quote unquote normal dude. I just thought listening to the man himself talk would be the best way to end the show. I don't own this audio, the BBC does, and I think it's okay to use clips from news channels, but I'm not entirely sure, so if putting this on the show is technically illegal in some aspect, I apologize and certainly don't mean for it to be. This is for educational/historical purposes. Hopefully the show sounds decent today. I got new stuff in the studio, trying to figure out a new sound to make things sound better. If I sounded like I was talking funny or the audio quality is not up to snuff, it's just me trying to get settled into the remodeled studio here. NoBetterDeath.info for all info on No Better Death, and no www in front of that. For some reason, if you www it doesn't work. Just go to NoBetterDeath.info, or you can just Google No Better Death and find the link to the Podbean site that hosts No Better Death. But yeah, NoBetterDeath.info for links, show notes, and more. If there's anything you want to say to me or your fellow death nerds, stories you want to hear on the show, whatever you got, hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or NoBetterDeath@gmail. If you would be so kind, please tell your friends and leave an iTunes review. It helps the show a lot. I'm also considering putting together a Patreon and getting some merch of some kind going. I'll keep you updated on those things as they develop. Stick around for the next episode. We're going to take a look at the New England vampire panic in a story that was suggested by your fellow death nerd, Chris Albert. I am sick, that goth kid you went to high school with. No, it wasn't just a phase, Mom. Grayson. Until next time, try not to die.
What sort of relationship do you have with other Manchester bands?
We tend to be pretty isolated now, really. Apart from the Factory groups, we have a lot to do with the other groups on Factory. So we tend to play a lot of gigs with them. And other things like the Durruti Column LP, the Sandpaper Sleeve, we stuck that on. So, everyone's there, everyone meets each other with that. But groups like the Buzzcocks, we knew them when we started, really. When we sort of see them, we talk to them, it's not very often. So we'd like to, see a lot more of other Manchester groups, I think. Any other groups in general.
Yeah, what do you think of the sort of state of New Wave?
Don't know, I think a lot of it tends to have lost its edge, really. There's quite a few newer groups that I've heard odd records of, or have seen maybe. I like the groups on Factory, Certain Ratio and Section 25. I tend not to listen, when I'm listening to records, I don't listen to much new wave stuff. I tend to listen to the stuff I used to listen to a few years back. But, sort of odd singles. I know someone who works in a record shop where I live, and I'll go in there and he'll play me, I'll hear this single. The singles by, we call it Tight. So an obscure thing, and you call, I think, Bauhaus, London group. It's one single. There's no one I completely like that I can say, well, I've got all this person's records and I think he's great, or this group's records. It's just odd things.
Do you have any plans of gigging outside this country?
We've played in Europe already, in Holland and Germany, and we are going to America. We're only going for, I think they wanted us to go for about 3 months or something, but we're only going for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and Rough Trade will probably be organising that. I think we're going with Cabaret Volta. Like that. Yeah, a good group. I forgot about that. But we tend to do what we want, really. We play the music we want to play, and play the places we want to play. I'd hate to be on the usual record company where it's sort of, you get an album out, you do a tour, you do all the Odeons and the this, that and the others. You just couldn't do that at all. So we had experience of that, supporting the Buzzcocks. It was really soul destroying, at the end of it. We said we'd never tour, and we'll never do a tour, I don't think, or if we do, it will not be longer than about 2 weeks.
Yeah, what is your sort of relationship with Factory Records?
It's very good, sort of friends, everyone knows each other, it's all 50-50, everything's split.
Doesn't it seem a bit insular sort of thing with Factory sort of set up?
Don't know, I suppose, to someone looking at it from the outside, I suppose it is really. They're not pressurised into having to sign, get a normal record company. They're always looking for the next group, the next big thing, to bring the record sales in, for them to promote and everything. But Factory just sign who they want to, put records by whom they want to out, package it how they want to, how they like doing it. It's just run like that. You might get sort of a spurt of 3 singles out, and you might not see anything for the next 6 months, I like the relationship.
A couple of tracks on some third Bastille-Con, was it? Or was it second Bastille-Con?
It's the second one,
yeah. How did you get involved with FAS, an Edinburgh company?
Yeah, it was when we started playing, we played a few days with the Rosillos. Bob Last was the manager at the time, and he talked then about setting up his own record label, and he wanted us to do a single for him, but due to other Factory coming along and other things, and he did, I think it was a Gang of Four and the Human League first, and got sort of tied in sort of in a management way with the Human League. I think he manages, and maybe another one. It never came about. When we were doing the album, we had quite a few tracks left over. We recorded 16 in the lot and just put 10. And our manager Rob Gretton had talked to him about certain things. We'd always sort of kept in touch. He mentioned his idea for Akon, and we just offered him, the 2 tracks to put out on that, because we like to get sort of everything we record out one way or another. Like we've done the Akon, we're doing a Sordid Sentimental thing, which is a French limited edition magazine come record thing. There's 2 tracks on that that'll be coming out, that won't be on an album or a single. Just that we like getting, as much stuff out as we can, really, in some form or another. It's often hard with Factory because obviously they're limited financially. I mean, you can't just put out a record, when they've got other things planned. And if it doesn't, with no room on the LP, then we tend to look for other outlets for them, really. See what we can do.
Where do you see, or where do you feel you want Joy Division to end or go to?
I just want to carry on the way we are, I think. Basically, we want to play and enjoy what we like playing. I think when we stop doing that, I think, that'll be time to pack it in. That'll be the end.
What is it that makes us so afraid of what we don't understand? We're setting out to investigate everything strange and unusual in our world, Like, if they have the technology to get here, they're not coming here to, like, observe us to be like, ooh, what can we learn? We invite guests that bring their different perspectives on the supernatural.
I mean, especially considering the fact that the overwhelming majority of UFO sightings and documentation occurs within miles of nuclear testing facilities.
Yeah. They bring their own personal encounters with the paranormal.
All of a sudden, I feel this whoosh of wind and this ringing in my ear so loud that makes me stand up straight. And I look at my dad to just stand up too. And we both had this moment of, maybe we should get out of here. Something doesn't feel right.
And something woke me up and told me, Ashley, there's someone in the closet.
A few months into living at the new house, I was woken up to the lamps being on and the snow globe music box going off.
Hello. And most of all, we just have a ton of fun.
Jacques would never eat, not a single bite, just sip from his glass of wine.
He was a vampire. He was a vampire.
100% a vampire. Holy buckets. So I have a bathroom ghost that follows me.
You know who else has a bathroom ghost?
Who?
Harry Potter. My name is Ashley, and this is my co-host Lauren.
Hello, weirdos.
And you are listening to Keep It Weird.